Good stuff.
Yep.
Okay. And now, another artist that we've covered on two separate occasions, just like Dire Straits, is Kate Bush. And today we're going to be covering Hounds of Love. And I just realized, Matt, that I did not give you the songs that we were, or Josh, the songs that we're going to do. So I kind of have to do it right now, right?
Yes.
So
Tell me what they are.
that's actually, yeah, it's kind of, yeah, well, it's kind of like, where do you put like Running Up That Hill, right? Because that's obviously
Yeah.
the song that is most. So we'll put that in the montage so that it's there.
Okay.
And then before it, I guess I could put Cloud Busting, but I'm gonna go outside the box and put Waking the Witch as the song before the segment. So here you go. Here's Waking the Witch.
Intense choice.
Okay, so to understand, like, the bio of Kate Bush is going to be fascinating because the two other times that we did this, right, we didn't really go into her bio. That was Cold Listen, Hot Take both times, and I think that both to understand like who Kate Bush is, you need a little bit of bio, but also to understand what this album is, you have to understand a little bit of Kate Bush's journey because it will explain this album a little bit. So I'm going to try to do that without going too long, guys. So let's start with who Kate Bush is. Okay, Kate Bush, born July 30th, 1958 in, it's a town called Bexleyheath, Kent, in England. She grew up with two elder brothers, two parents as well, in a 350-year-old farmhouse. Which, by the way, in case you're wondering, is older than our country that we all reside in right now. Her house was. So
Wow.
I found that to be pretty remarkable. There's a lot of very interesting things about Kate Bush that are going to come up. One thing to know about Kate Bush is that she is incredibly headstrong, but like not in the way that seems to alienate people. It's more like she has an opinion and she is able to assert her opinion. And I think what's most interesting to her is she asserts it usually in a very male dominated world and gets her way pretty much all the time. I think that's why she kind of runs away from the feminist tag in a way that I think frustrates some folks that kind of want to adopt her, as like a female icon. But she kind of, there's a very famous quote where I don't want to misquote it, but basically she says she likes artists like David Bowie and male artists because they're basically allowed to be like balls out kind of, and she felt like female artists like have to make like female music, right? And she's like, I don't operate in that space. I operate in my own space where I make my own art, and I feel like sometimes like I get stuck. A lot of times she's getting compared to like Joni Mitchell and stuff, and she both likes that comparison because I think she sees a kindred spirit, right, in Joni Mitchell, but also doesn't like the fact that it's like, but we're also creating our own music, and I don't like that I have to be part of this lineage. And she's also compared to like every other songwriter, including some that don't fit as easily, you know what I mean, like your Linda Ronstadt, Carly Simon, stuff like that. She's like, they're cool, but like I am my own deal, right, and I don't understand why I have to be in that. So that's something to kind of know about her. So like many artists, I feel like historically female, but certainly the 80s, including the woman who she knocked off of the UK charts with this album, Madonna. She was raised Roman Catholic, which is interesting when you think of her artistic journey. She goes to St. Joseph's Covenant Grammar School, a Catholic girls' school. During the time that she is there, before this, she taught herself how to play the piano at age 11, and she also played the organ in a barn in her parents' house. She studies the violin. She begins kind of writing her own songs, but it really picks up during the time that she is in grammar school and heading into what we would call high school here, but that type of age. Her parents are artistic. Mom was a dancer. Her dad was an amateur pianist. Her brother worked as an instrument maker, and her other brother, John. So her first one is Patty, and then Paddy, and then John, her other brother, was like a poet and a photographer. So obviously, when I'm reading this, I'm like, boy, this is like very similar to like PJ Harvey, who we'll cover later, like similar type of deal where everybody in the family is artistic. They grew up in the country kind of and became their own sort of artistic creature kind of. So I think when we cover PJ Harvey, you'll see some similar vibes there. So I never really realized as much till I did the bio for this. But so she's in this grammar school, St. Joseph's, and she and her family produce a demo tape with 50 songs on it. And it gets circulated to record labels who kind of say thanks but no thanks because she's all of 15 years old when this is happening. However, a gentleman by the name of Ricky Hopper gets a hold of this, and it ends up in the hands of David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, who we talked about last segment. But David Gilmour gets this, and he is intrigued, and he decides to help Kate Bush, who is all of 16 years old at this time, as he puts it, professionalize her demo tape. But actually, Gilmour comes off great in these stories, and I know he kind of has his own, all the Pink Floyd guys, Waters and Gilmour, they're kind of all known as being a little bit difficult at times, but he actually pays for her to record 3 tracks in what I guess he would call a more professional manner. He doesn't use professional condescendingly either. It's more like, these are amateur, we're going to make it sound a little bit better. And a gentleman by the name of Andrew Powell, who's a friend of Gilmour, produces it. He also goes on to produce Kate Bush's first 2 albums, and the tape is sent to EMI, and EMI signs Kate Bush at the age of 18. So she begins to work on an album that we covered called The Kick Inside. And what happens is Bush is on a retainer for 2 years from, I think, late 17 to 19, right? That's when she's on this, and she's, during that time, there's a lot of arguments about it. A gentleman by the name of Bob Mercer is in charge of EMI's, they called it group repertoire, but it sounds almost like deciding what's going to be released or not. His idea is that he thought the album was good enough to release, but he felt like if it was too outside the box, right, for the general public, that it would like kind of break Kate Bush. That was his thought, right? Gilmour and Bush both dispute that, but Gilmour in particular disputes that. He said they were using the wrong producers and had bad ideas. The other thing to know is that during this time, she had recorded most of her stuff with a band that included her brother and other local musicians called the KT Bush Band, like KT, because she's Catherine Bush. And they kind of said, no, you need more professional musicians. So she kind of she tries to keep as many around, and she eventually brings them back into the fold, as many possible, including her brother, Paddy, who played the harmonica and the mandolin, was part of the KT band. So during this time, a couple funny things happened that I think you'll find funny. First, she records up to 200 songs during this time, some of which become bootlegs at just different points. So I just imagine this young Kate Bush just exploding. The other thing I thought was hilarious was that EMI gave her a large advance, I guess, to not themselves discourage her while she's doing this. So she's writing these songs. She enrolls in interpretive dance classes taught by Lindsay Kemp, who you may recognize. He used to teach David Bowie, and much like Bowie, she also does mime training like Bowie did when we talked about him. And they said that during this time, she actually spent more time on schoolwork than recording in their mind, which they said that, but then I'm like, how could she have written 200 songs if she was spending, how prolific was she, But she kind of got to her A levels, which is the exams in Great Britain. And then finally they decide okay, you're going to have to commit to this. So she records The Kick Inside with these new studio musicians, but she slowly starts weaving, people back in. I think the thing is that, the Kick Inside has songs that she wrote as young as she was 13 years old. I think most famously, the record company wanted to release James and the Cold Gun, which, if you remember, is sort of the most straightforward song on that, as the debut single. But Kate Bush basically is like, no, it's going to be Wuthering Heights. And I'm like, I don't know, that song's a little bit strange, Kate. And she's like, no, it has to be the single and stuff. And she wins, which, when you think about, like, 1978, right? Like, 19-year-old female, you don't think of that winning too many things in a room full of men, right? But not only does she get that, but they fund the video, which I don't know if you've ever seen the video for Wuthering Heights, but it's famous. She's basically like in a white dress, just like, there's two different versions. There's one where she's like in the woods, and the other is sort of like she's doing the whole ghost pantomime of, like, Katherine Henshaw and Wuthering Heights and stuff. So she does that. It becomes a surprise success, selling over 1 million copies. Wuthering Heights tops the UK and Australian charts. It becomes a pretty big hit. And so then they tried to break into America, where Kate Bush's Je ne sais quoi does not transfer as easily. And it's disappointing in America, but EMI is still pretty excited. During this time, there's a lot of funny stories. They managed to get a picture of Kate Bush, I guess, where she's in a light pink top that I guess they felt made her sexy, because I guess it exposed a little bit of cleavage. But Kate Bush, that like really pissed her off a little bit. She kind of says, they promoted me as a female body. During this time also, in her mind, they kind of force her to quickly record a follow-up album, which she's not alone during this era. I know that, like, Boston, right, was another one that got forced into the studio quicker. And, like, much like Boston, like, it led to, like, the person basically saying, I'm never allowing this to happen. I'm going to completely control my, like, narrative going forward, right? And that's a little bit of what happens with her. They rush out the album Lionheart, and she feels that there was much she could have done with it. She was kind of dissatisfied with it, thinking she needed more time. So Kate Bush is a woman of action. So she decides to set up her own publishing company called Kate Bush Music. Keep in mind that this is around like 1980, so she's all about like 22 years old at this point. She also creates her own management company to maintain control of her work. And she appoints members of her family as the board of directors. During this so like basically she's all in right there in terms of doing stuff. She also went on tour for pretty much the only time in her career before randomly coming back a few years ago, just out of the clear blue. But during this tour, she played a series of shows. It was the spring of 1979. There were 17 costume changes, dancing, lighting, and there were a couple bands in the 60s that did this primitively, but she becomes the first well-known artist to fashion like the wireless microphone, that you see artists in the 80s and 90s using. I always think of like Madonna using it and stuff like that, or like Bobby
like the
Brown,
one that
right?
Runs around your head.
You got it, yeah, like up against, you got it. And so she doesn't create it, but she popularizes that. So, but then she doesn't tour again until the numbers turn to 2-0 later. That's how long she doesn't tour. And I think it's because...
Wow. I did not realize. She didn't, like, tour regularly?
She did not tour regularly at all until 2014, March 2014, when she randomly announced that she was going to do a 22-night residency in London from August to October.
So her entire career is just based on these albums, basically.
Yeah, and she's not alone. There's a couple other bands we're going to cover in the 80s that also famously did not tour. I'm trying to think of who we covered before. It was XTC, right? They stopped touring for most of their career as well. They basically were just a studio band. So there's a couple other ones. So anyway, Kick Inside, then we go to the second album. She's basically taking care of the business. And around 1980, she begins to get interested in production, and she starts co-producing albums with a gentleman named John Kelly. She eventually produces albums in entirety, Hounds of Love, which we're doing today. And I know this one's already going long, but I'll give you a little bit more of an idea. Around this time, she becomes very interested in synthesizers and drum machines, which really weren't on her earlier albums. She particularly falls in love with the Fairlight CMI, which we heard lots of in The Dreaming, which we covered. She falls in love with that from two stories come up quite a bit. One is she was providing backing vocals on Peter Gabriel's third album, and during that time he was using it. And also she was listening. She went to a concert of Stevie Wonder, who also famously enjoyed the Fairlight CMI and certainly loved synthesizers and drum machines, as we know from the 70s. And she decides to start playing around with it. The Never Forever album got to number 5 in the UK singles, still did not break through in the US. Probably the song that people may know best from that album is Babushka, which was a pretty big hit and, is still pretty well known. The Dreaming we covered, but The Dreaming was the album before this, and The Dreaming does not sell very well. As I think we talked about at that time, people said that it was too synthesizer heavy because it had the Fairlight. It certainly is more of an art rock album. You'll hear like less accessible, and her record company is not happy. The album becomes the first to chart in the US Billboard 200 for her, but it only gets to 157. And she only gets a silver disc. So the record label was disappointed in this, and basically puts a little bit of pressure on Kate Bush for Hounds of Love. And Kate Bush still maintains quite a bit of her artistic freedom, but she makes a concession, and the concession seems to be that she splits Hounds of Love into two distinct sides, which takes advantage of the album and the vinyl formats, right? The first side, and I think it's pretty clear when you listen to this album, is the accessible pop side, yes. Kind of made for the record label. And the second side is sort of the experimental side, that is the other side of it. So it's kind of like she doesn't compromise her vision, right? It's just sort of more a concession that, yeah, maybe I need to sell some more albums, so I'll make stuff that sounds more like Running Up That Hill and Cloud Busting, as opposed to some of the stuff that was on The Dreaming, which was a little bit more avant-garde. So in that way, we talked about Dire Straits before, where there was a split, but Kate Bush's was very deliberately a split in there. I think it's also interesting that Kate Bush never refers to the song Running Up That Hill as being titled Running Up That Hill, because she had labeled it as a deal with God, but the record company thought that was too sensitive. So she only refers to that album as she only refers to that song as a deal with God herself. Like that, she doesn't call it Running Up That Hill. Like that's how she views it. So I thought that was there, and obviously she continues to make albums, The Sensual World in 89, and then The Red Shoes in 93, before sort of becoming a mother and having pretty much an extended hiatus until 2006. She comes back with The Golden Compass in 2007. It's just a song for that. And then, like I said, she just drops an album in 2011 called Director's Cut, and then suddenly decides to play concerts. She does an album in 2011 which has Elton John on it and kind of comes out of nowhere, and she kind of just continues to release music whenever the hell she feels like it. And so that is a little bit about Kate Bush leading up to this album. There's more, and I'll drop it in as we go along, but I'm curious to hear what you guys thought, because third Kate Bush album, certainly a completely different album than each of the others, which were different than the others. I think Matt is our first take on this one.
John, did you say that she did a song for the Golden Compass movie? Is that what you're referring to?
I believe it is the Golden Compass movie. Let me look, because I skimmed over. So in 2007, she was asked to write a song for the Golden Compass soundtrack.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Which is a 2007 fantasy adventure film.
Yeah, Philip Pullman series books.
His Dark Materials.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
was pretty much where she...
And a TV show now, actually.
So she, I lied. She went on hiatus for a long time, but did make an album called Ariel in November 2005. And I think between Red Shoes and 93, the Aerial, which was 2005. Then she made the song in 2007 for Golden Compass, and then did 2 additional albums.
It's like the Sensual World was 89.
No, that's what I said. Yeah, she was still making albums at her normal clip, right? With Sensual World, Red Shoes. It was they became a little bit more spread out, because you see, she, like I said, she, after the first 2, right? She's like, I'm going to release my albums whenever the hell I feel like I'm going to release my albums, and she was kind of allowed to. Yep. So, what do you think, Matt?
So I only knew Running Up the Hill, and actually, I think I only started listening to that when I heard all the buzz for the Stranger Things, and I was like, do I know that song? And then I played it, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I guess I wasn't that familiar with it. But so this album, I was surprised with how, especially in the beginning, how poppy it was. Especially coming off of The Dreaming, which was, it seemed to be much more experimental overall than this. So I was expecting this to be more like that. And so I was a little bit taken aback at first. The first 3 songs are very easy to like. It was just like one listens, like Hounds of Love's great. Pop song Big Sky's a great song too. I like especially when they brought the guitar. They did this. She does this. I like it when artists, they do this thing where they play the song for a little bit. You kind of get an idea what's going on, and then they throw this other element to it. It just adds so much more to it. And when that guitar came in towards the end of the Big Sky, I was like, oh, I love this, right? So I was like right into it. And it's interesting that, like, I don't know, Mother Stands for Comfort is kind of considered as part of the pop part of this, because that's the first song that starts to kind of get on the little bit of the arty or avant-garde trajectory. And it's not like, it's just got some interesting elements. It's got that whistle that's going on, and it's a little creepy sounding.
It's got like this industrial percussion to it.
It's just doesn't scream pop to me, but it's experimental, but it's also not like terribly experimental, and then it kind of goes off into the more arty kind of realm, which to me still doesn't get as arty as the previous record, but I liked kind of the use of the strings, and like a song like Cloud Bursting and Under Ice, you got the interesting kind of dramatic strings that are playing there. And Dream of Sheep is a very pretty song. It's kind of more of a straight ahead kind of piano ballad kind of thing. And that was very pleasant. And then you get Waking the Witch, which is like, okay, here we go. This is where you're starting. I thought the album would be more like that as a whole. Initially, it was put off by that vocaling that she's doing, where it's kind of going in and out really quickly, and so it's kind of abrasive, I would say. But as I became more familiar with the song, I appreciated that more. I think I liked that kind of effect that she was doing. And then she comes in with Jig of Life, which I loved. I mean, this is the Irish, trad music that's coming through, and made me it took me back to my days when I was in Ireland.
Very much Kate Bush doing trad music,
correct?
Not Richard and Linda Thompson doing,
right. No, well, it's
kind
of it's interesting because she does like the verses with like, it's kind of like more of the arty Kate Bush thing, and then they do the breakdown, which is just pretty much a straight ahead jig that they're doing, right? And it's that could be just in any pub in Ireland that's happening, and then they bring it back to a little bit of a harsher element to it. So really liked that. Hello Earth was drawn out a little bit. The Gregorian chanting or whatever, the chorus that was kind of happening towards the end there was an interesting vibe to it. Maybe went a little bit long, but I still found interesting there. And the Morning Fog, I thought was a nice way to end it. There's definitely, there's parts of this that has an 80s feel with the synths that she's using that you were kind of talking about, John. And I think it's watching you within
differently in this album though than she did in the previous album.
True. Yes. But this is more, to me, this is more of a pop oriented. This is more for the layman, I would say. This would be a good, of the 3 albums that we listened to, if somebody wanted to get into Kate Bush, I would say start here. Like this
it's
is
definitely the most accessible.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Sure. And Watching You Without Me kind of has a little bit of the world music, a little bit similar to that Dire Straits song they were talking about, the pan flute kind of vibe a little bit, kind of thing. So I did like this record. I think I liked the last one better. I was hoping for a little bit more avant-garde here that would kind of scratch that itch of being like really, the avant-garde with the melody behind it. And this did have it. I felt like this had a little bit of the Dire Straits thing for me, in that some of the more subdued stuff, like Mother Stands for Comfort, or and Dream of Sheep, which I liked, or Watching You Within Me, I liked that too. It didn't really, I wasn't like, oh my God, I'm in love with this. I had my expectations built up to be like, oh man, this is going to be the album. This is going to be in the top of my list of the year for the decade. And I don't think that it will be, actually. I think Daydreaming might have a better chance of that for me.
The Dreaming, you mean, right?
Yes, The Dreaming. Sorry. Thank you. But there's definitely plenty of interesting elements here. I love her voice. I mean, you got to talk about her voice. It's so distinct, and you could hear. And I know we've talked about this with some of her previous records, but just the influence that she has in so many female artists. Somebody like even recent artists like a Saint Vincent or whatever. The PJ Harvey, certainly there. The Bjorks of the world, like these really creative, influential, groundbreaking female artists. And it seems like indie rock, indie artist, and it seems like, man, it all kind of gets traced back here, because this is different than Joni Mitchell. This is different than, some of the other, even you mentioned Madonna. This is different than that. This is not, there's pop in here, but there's is way more than that. And so I got to go thumbs up here, but I also have to have a caveat there that I was actually a little disappointed, because I was expecting to be blown away by this. And I wasn't. I think that, I think that there was a couple of moments in here where I lost interest to an extent, but overall, it's a very interesting album, and I'm glad that I got to know it better.
Yeah, Kate Bush is always, I can't remember if I've said this before, but she's always name checked as like, she's always up there on like the best albums of the 80s, or like, most influential, or
you know what we never did? Numbers.
Okay, I thought I was going.
I was going to say that at the beginning of mine. I forgot a second time. So anyway, sorry, Josh. Hounds of Love. It's number 7 in the 1980s.
Okay.
Number 1 in 1985. Number 63 of all time. It's very close to Rolling Stone's list, because the Rolling Stone gave it 68 of all time.
See?
So it is all those things. You're right.
Profoundly influential.
Yep, her highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and she's number 48 in overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So there you go.
Yeah, and so this is I really like this album, and I really like Kate Bush. I think it just continues what I thought of her with the Dreaming album. And the thing I like about her is, and John said this in the bio, is just like, she's like singularly herself. And I feel like that comes through in the music. The other thing that kind of gets away from some of those other singer-songwriters that we talked about, it's not just her and a guitar, or that's not kind of the foundation. I think she's very interested in using as many different instruments as possible. She's interested in playing clearly with like kind of the production of her music, and not just playing, but like layering and experimenting and pushing the envelope and kind of doing different things. I mean, first and foremost with her voice, she's always trying to do different stuff with her voice. I like when she goes full demon mode on Waking the Witch, and like
it's creepy.
Other female artists are not doing that at that time, for sure. And she's layering her voice, like she's overdubbing her, or whatever it is, backing vocals of herself against herself, and she's doing that a lot. And go ahead.
It's that commitment to characters, because like, she's always singing as like a character, or like putting herself in, going all the way back to Wuthering Heights, right, where she's literally playing a character from the novel Wuthering Heights. And like, in Waking the Witch, she's like, I'm gonna commit to basically being a witch, and I'm gonna sing from that viewpoint of it. And it could be really campy and corny, but like it doesn't come off that way. It's actually more provocative. Mm-hmm.
And this is like kind of what I would like dream pop to be, if she was the genre, because like this is an actual dream, right? It's like constantly changing. It's always keeping you off balance. Sometimes it's a nightmare. Sometimes it's like ethereal. She definitely still has that ethereal kind of like underpinning to it, like she had on the Dreaming. And it all kind of works for me. I like when every song is different. She's always doing, The Jig of Life. I really like that song too, with the fiddles and the pipes. the Irish pipes. I don't think I looked it up because it's not really a bagpipe, but it's something like similar to it. So she's still got this kind of like folk homage in there, and then she's got like cloud busting, which I really liked as a song. She throws the strings in that really work for me, and then she's got the drums that kick in with the vocals on it. That was a great song. Hounds of Love has this cello that is really awesome that I really like, and she's just kind of always marrying these different things and putting it through a Kate Bush filter, and like it works really well. She Running Up the Hill, which is, you know, kind of obviously now the most famous track of her entire career, probably, if not.
No, I think Wuthering
legacy.
Heights still might be. It's still.
I don't know.
For Gen Z, I think Running Up That Hill is.
With Stranger Things, I think that's, you know, that is reinvigorated interest
for
in her.
people like my parents who love Kate Bush, I think it's always going to be Wuthering Heights because it was such a striking song, like out of the left field, you know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. For another era of people,
It's a good song because I don't know, she has this like constant tempo with the drums underneath it, and then she's like overdubbing herself on it, or layering herself, and it's an earworm. It gets in your head for sure. And then she like kind of, you know, I'm kind of jumping all over in the album, but Big Sky has like it's almost like a dance track. It's kind of repetitive, but she comes in with like hand claps at one point, and that kind of takes it to another level. And that is kind of like this kind of soaring, ethereal track that really works well. And so there's always something interesting, and I like this album the more I listen to it. And it kept me off kilter. Like the first time you hear Waking the Witch, you're like, what is happening? Yeah. But then it kind of like, when you're expecting it, it kind of like works and grows on you.
Starts to make sense.
Yeah. So I like it. I appreciated the bio because I didn't know anything about her, and was kind of didn't know she was so sporadic in her output. It seemed like she was somebody that was kind of always making music and I didn't know about, and I guess that's the case to some extent, but I thought she would have more, I don't know, I thought she'd be like a worldwide phenomenon at one point in her career or something, but
well, she was huge and always was huge in Britain. Okay. I'd like to point that out. It didn't really carry to here, but like she was always considered like a major star in Great Britain, like the type that like this album came out and knocked Like a Virgin off the charts. So like that's to give you an idea in Britain where she stands.
She is kind of like, now in my head, she's kind of like a Bjork type of artist, where she's like associated, kind of singular, associated with a country and uniquely herself. But yeah, I really like this album. 2 thumbs up for me.
Yeah, it's funny because we talked a little bit. I think I said before that it's kind of like she doesn't really have true like mothers or fathers. Like she has elements, right? Like you could see why she worked with like Peter Gabriel, right, or stuff like, because there's sort of that art rock world, but she exists outside of it. And the more I listen, it's funny. Like Matt mentioned some like Saint Vincent and stuff, and you know, certainly I've mentioned PJ Harvey, who certainly we've left out other people like Tori Amos, right? Suzanne Vega. I mean, these are all people that are like clearly influenced, and the more you listen, the more you're like, you know, like there aren't a lot of people. Fiona Apple, is another, exactly. There's basic, and then you start saying, you go like, okay, so anyone who was sort of
they're like just badass, right? Badass
female who kind of did their own thing, right? Like kind of like this, she was the lane, she and Joni Mitchell, right?
Like unapologetic, you know, just
well, they have their own feminism, right? Like it's a strong female, but like couched as sort of like a, like, it's you know, because they're not treading on sex, right? They're not treading on femininity, but they're also not ambiguous, right? Like or androgynous. You know, they're definitively female while also not embodying the things that sort of we said females have to be, right? And so that's why it's so funny to think of like the record company saying like, you know what we can do? Let's take the woman who sang, Wuthering Heights, and let's put her in like a cute little top, and I think this will be what breaks her to there. It's like you just think of that, like people listening to her albums, and it's like, yeah, that's clearly never gonna work, guys. Like that's not what the lane. It became so clear so early, right? And that's what I've always liked. My favorite Kate Bush album is The Dreaming, which we covered before, because I like the strange Kate Bush the best. I love when she's just going full on like bizarre choices or inhabiting like characters that are vaguely uncomfortable, and you're like, I wonder what piece of media Kate Bush, because that's like a big thing with her. She consumes either a book or a piece of media. Like she'll watch a documentary, or she'll read something, or watch something on TV, and not only even the thing, like the Wuthering Heights thing was famously, she had read the book, but she was inspired by like the BBC broadcast of it, right? And that's kind of what got the vibe for her. And so like, where does she get these characters? And I mean, The Dreaming, you're getting like There Goes a Tenor and Pull Out the Pin, and The Dreaming and Houdini, like all of these interesting things, and each of them are tied to things that she consumed. So like the literary person in me like really appreciates that approach to doing things. And here you've got like Tennyson, like the poet Ralph Tennyson and stuff like that are in here. I also love the fact that like Under Ice sounds like it's like that you're under ice, and it's being sung with like the desperation of like someone who would be like under ice. If you were to say, like, what would it sound like if you were trapped under ice? Like, it's kind of that, right? And, like, what would it sound like if you wake the witch? It's that. I can appreciate the first side, and it's hard to not understand the appeal of cloud-busting hounds of love running up that hill, right? But I almost feel like, to some degree, as much as I like them, I've heard them so many times. All three of them, I know that it sounds like she might have floated under your radar, but, like, if you become aware of Kate Bush, right? Like those three songs, Wuthering Heights, Babushka. There's a couple songs that come later that are pretty big ones, but they're kind of the ones that This Woman's Work, I think, comes on a later album and stuff like that. Those are the big, singles. But to me, what I really appreciate about Kate Bush is like the deep cuts, and the second half of this album was my jam. Like Under Ice, Waking the Witch I love that 1-2 combo. You guys have mentioned I love the fact that it's like, it's trad, but there's like something that doesn't make it that like that kind of like loses me, where it's too festive. It's sort of still a little bit ominous is the wrong word, but like it's got a little bit of more of an edge, which sometimes like that Irish music doesn't have for me. The Morning Fog, Matt, I think is the song that you were imagining would be on the first half, with Mother Stands for Comfort probably being inserted into the second half. I feel like if you were to trade those two, right, it would line up a little bit more.
Yeah,
this
that's
Morning
probably
Fog is this pleasant little 2-minute and 35-second pop song that comes in. I agree with you guys. The weakest track on this is Hello Earth. A little bit. If it had just been 4 minutes, I might have liked it more, but it does draw on a little bit. But hey, when you're taking chances, right, you're going to have some that don't connect. So yeah, much like the other two, I really like this album quite a bit. She does sort of veer into the pop lane a little bit more, I'd say, going forward. So she steps a little bit more away from the truly weird. Which is a little sad for me because that's the version I like the best. But this is also a better marriage for those that might be turned off by the synth heavy nature of The Dreaming. Like this one does kind of bring in other instrumentation at a higher level. The strings, piano, stuff like that were present in earlier Kate Bush albums, but sort of receded to the background when she was just messing around with the synthesizer pretty much exclusively in the last one. It worked for me, but I could see how this one, it's like, okay, it's reined into like a level I like more. But this is an easy thumbs up for me. And she has a thing that I really can appreciate in an artist, in that she takes a lot of chances, and I'm interested not just artistically by the chances she takes, but aesthetically by a high percentage of songs that are also risky songs. Maybe that's a little bit why I like Fiona Apple so much, Matt, because I think she also is another one that hits quite a bit with ideas that on paper I wouldn't think would work for me. So nice. There's my general take. Any final thoughts that you guys would like to add on this one?
I don't think this is the last. Is this the last time we're covering her?
Yeah,
This is the last time we're going to be covering
Yeah, it's too
her.
bad. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Like some of these artists that are just so creative and interesting that they, don't have it doesn't always mean they're going to have a ton of output, or when they do, it's like many years goes and kind of go in between, releasing albums. I guess, she just found other things to occupy her time in the 90s. And
they go for it with Sensual World in America. That's when they're like, all right, you keep producing top 10 albums in Great Britain, so we know we got that. So Sensual World's like, okay, this is the album that we're going to sort of break her through in America. It does get to the American top 30, and she does actually leave England, which is something she almost never did, to go to a Tower Records, which I found hilarious, on the Lower East Side in New York, in which she has a line that stretched almost 6 city blocks, and she ended up signing albums for, or I guess in this case CDs, for like 4 hours because it's so rare. So that gives you an idea. And so she continues to be hugely popular in Great Britain, like a big pop figure. But in America, I think that's why she probably flew under your radar, because she was, I'm not going to say marginal, but she was sort of like someone but don't know. I don't know if you were a music fan in England, if she could have filled that role. She was too big a name. Yeah.
She was not on Nick Rocks.
No, like she is not. She probably would have been amused by Nick Rocks, but in the way of, I love the fact that she does her art and walks her own path, but it doesn't come at the expense of anyone else. It's just, she sort of inhabits her own world, which people like that always fascinate me. I just don't think that she's truly pulled by any trends besides whatever the hell she wants to do at that exact moment, which is such a rare thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, was she even on MTV? I don't know.
I never saw her.
No, definitely for this album. Cloud Busting has a pretty famous video that goes along with the song, where it's like, the idea of cloud busting is that there's this guy and he thinks he can change the weather, and the video is, it's actually a very famous, running up that hill as a video too. And she's very visual. Like Babushka's got a very famous video, and Wuthering Heights has 2 or 3 different videos. So she was there. She was there. Yeah. Especially the one I always remember is the cloud busting video that was pretty well known. But she might have been more later, Josh, when her videos were showing up more like in the VH1 lane, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So